Hello guys, Winston here. Since college, my friends and I have considered ourselves to be patrons of tabletop entertainment. We used to spend hours a week sabotaging each other's study habits and sleep schedules playing Settlers of Catan. But ever since we got jobs and had to pretend to be responsible adults, there just hasn't been as much time to get together and enjoy a few rounds of Carcassonne or Ticket to Ride. So when my friend John proposed restarting the old habit, we resolved to do so in style, and thus was born the League of Board Games and Brews. The plan was to all get together once a month or so and each bring a choice beverage to share while waging simulated economic warfare against each other. To facilitate the beverage sharing portion of these events, we decided to put together some custom beer flight carriers, game-themed of course. The most obvious deviation we thought to make from the time-honored paddle design for beer flight ferrying was the overall shape. For players of Settlers of Catan as well as a few other games, hexagonal tiles are an iconic part of the experience. Because 6 varieties of beer per flight seems a little ambitious and 5 beers is a really awkward number to distribute on a polygon with an even number of points, we settled on a simple 4 beer flight. This would ensure that our sobriety was not entirely erased until at least the second round of board games, and it also let us design a smaller flight carrier, which is crucial because table space is at a premium in John's apartment. Now, although we could have achieved a beer glass isolating geometry by just punching a bunch of holes in a piece of wood with a large Forstner bit, that seemed way too boring. What I wanted to do was somehow decorate or engrave the surface of the flight carrier. With my beer flight tile, I wanted to maximize the amount of surface area I could apply a design to. This meant using as little material as possible to seat each beer sampling glass. The glasses we'd be purchasing for this venture were 5-ounce Anchor Hawken glasses, which had a nominal outer diameter of 2.25 inches. I designed the flight carrier to hold each beer glass with at least half an inch between neighboring glasses to permit easy pickup. For the decoration of the beer flight bearing surface, I wanted to transfer a game-appropriate image to the wood. Because the surface was recessed, I decided to apply a decal to an inlay that I could later press into the base of the flight carrier. This inlay would be carved from 1/4 inch plywood. I decided to try out 2 different image transfer techniques, the first being inkjet to wood via wax paper. This was something I picked up from Steve Ramsey, and it's pretty straightforward. Print whatever image you want onto a non-absorbent surface, and then press it directly onto the surface you want the image on. I used wax paper instead of the backing sheet from adhesive labels to transfer the ink since I didn't want to make a trip to Staples just for this experiment. And while the technique worked, it didn't apply enough liquid ink to produce a uniform image. The liquid ink beating up on the wax paper, combined with the millimetric surface irregularities of my plywood test piece, caused the image to look faint and slightly blurry. I decided to switch to the matte gel or Mod Podge image transfer technique. This involves taking a laser jet or glossy photo and gluing it to your substrate before stripping away the paper fibers. Inkjet doesn't work as well with this technique because the color-bearing particles seep into the paper, which you'll be removing later on. I started by brushing on an even coat of Mod Podge onto a mirrored image of what I want to show up on my beer tile. After it dried, I applied water to the back of the paper and started gently rubbing away the fibers. Although the Mod Podge didn't perfectly bond the ink to the plywood, the image came out largely intact and at the original resolution. In the areas where I'd printed in white or the coloring had rubbed off, you could see the wood grain showing through, which I think was a cool effect. This would be the technique I'd use for the final items. For my first test run, I milled out my beer flight's base from 3/4 inch poplar since it's fairly inexpensive but still more durable than pine. Since there's a lot of material removal involved, I switched to my DWP 611 with a 3-flute 1/4 inch end mill. I did a rough cut with a large step-over value since I didn't care what the finish on the bottom of my main pocket looked like. The inlay would cover it. I was a little more careful on the walls where I took the time to run a light finishing pass. Because I was making the base and inlay with 2 separate materials and 2 separate end mills on 2 separate spindles, I had to do a little trial and error to find the right end mill offset that would produce a snug fit. Then came the actual fit check with the beer sampler glasses. The spec sheet for these glasses indicated that their bases had a diameter of 1 3/4 inches, but I had no idea what the tolerance was on that value. I designed my flight carrier to accommodate glasses up to 1.80 inches in diameter. As it turns out, that wasn't quite enough. These glasses didn't only show variations in base diameter, but also shape. Some of them were more eccentric than others and didn't sit well in the pockets I'd carved. For the next iteration, I increased the allowable beer glass diameter to 1.85 inches, and that solved the problem. To finish my flight holders, I turned to multiple coats of spray lacquer. I wanted a decently thick coat that was both moisture resistant and durable, and I didn't know how to achieve that with a non-aerosolized delivery method. If any of you have suggestions for how I might do this part better, please drop me a comment down below. I was thinking I might use a self-leveling application of Minwax polyacrylic next time. And that's all I have for now. There are a couple things I have planned for the future with this Board Games and Brews concept. One is to have other shapes for flight holders like squares. Another is to run the base pieces over a router table with either a cove or roundover bit to provide some external features to make them easier to pick up. Before I sign off, I just want to mention that I'm going to be at World Maker Faire in New York roaming the show this coming weekend. So if you're in town, shoot me a tweet. I'd love to meet up and chat about projects, techniques, or really anything maker related. I get a lot of inspiration from the community for projects past, present, and future, so it's always great to hear from you guys. I want to thank you all very much for watching, and I will hopefully see you at Maker Faire.